Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate everything spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark Moore.
And I'm your other co-host, Josh Berkey.
Being joined by Faye Guerra, the hostess of Psycho Cinema.
Hi, how are you?
We're doing good.
This is the first episode, new journey of something that Mark and I are doing. If you guys have been following our sister parent company, Victims and Villains, for any amount of time, you guys know that Mark and I, when we get together and podcast, we mostly do horror movies, and so it kind of came into this idea of why not we just do an entire podcast spinoff all about horror movies, talking about everything from modern day to 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and everything that is in between there. And Mark, what are we doing on this inaugural episode?
We are covering Ghoulies today, a nice classic from the 80s.
So I've never seen this movie before. This was my first time, and boy did I do a deep dive into this, because I watched all four of these movies. But there's a very special reason that we brought Faye on to this episode. And Faye, like Mark said, is the hostess of Psycho Cinema, which is a program through the Winchester, Virginia Alamo Draft House, and also online community. And she is actually the reason that me and Mark ended up connecting, and that Mark is even on staff with us. So we thought, what better way to kick off our new project than to bring the person who brought us together to talk about her favorite movie.
Is my favorite movie, which I get a lot of ribbing about, honestly. I think when you watch as many genre films as I have, and as I'm sure you guys have, when people find out what your absolute favorite is, it can be kind of a surprise. But I stand by this movie. I stand by my choice. It's a great movie. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't try to be something it's not. It's just a good time.
Yeah, and all of us have horrible movies or cheesy movies that we love.
That is true. That is something that I always say is, when people come to me for my opinion on newer releases or any movie in general, I always preface it by saying, please know that my favorite movie in the world is Ghoulies. And quite honestly, I have garbage taste. Like, don't ever come to me for some kind of real opinion that matters.
I mean, I get harassed for loving The Love Guru. I can't tell you why I love the movie, but I do. And I will watch it all the time, and it's retarded, and it's great.
I feel like I'm kind of like on both sides. Like I have like films that like I really love, and like horror is that one of those genres that like when you love it, like truly love it, like all of us do, you accept like the classics like Psycho and Halloween and Friday the 13th right along with films like The Ghoulies and just like the campier side of it. Saturday the 14th, I don't know, is ringing in my head right now. It's particularly like it is. It's an absolute blast. But it's again.
I almost watched that last night.
God, man, you should have. So it is interesting that it's kind of one of those only genres, but I feel like I'm like kind of like in the prestige camp as well as the camp, all over the place.
Yeah, it took me a while to kind of get into the more cheesier, campy stuff. I was always into the big budget horror, but that was just due to lack of appreciation.
I feel like that I think is kind of a valid point, though. I think a lot of people, a lot of horror fans kind of get into it because of things that you're exposed to. So like a movie like Alien that everyone knows, or The Exorcist. But then once you spend a little bit more time and realize that you're a true fan of the genre, and you see what else is out there and all the little subgenres of things where there is that super low budget, silly stuff in there too. It's great. I mean, there's truly something for everyone.
It kind of reminds me of like hard rock and heavy metal. You start off listening to like Metallica and then explore the God knows how many genres. From drunken pirate metal to speed metal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got everything for everyone. And horror is the same way.
I agree.
I am happy though, watching this movie Ghoulies, because I honestly kind of, the only thing I knew about this was the now iconic poster of it, of the ghoulie coming out of the toilet and writing Ghoulies on the poster. That's the only thing about this movie I've ever known, and I we'll talk about it a little bit more, but like I've always kind of heard and thought that it was like a Gremlins ripoff, and so I'm like expecting that's what I was expecting, and like the kind of camp that comes in like the later sequels, especially part 3, like that's what I expected from Ghoulies 1. And Ghoulies 1 is actually it was a lot more serious and a lot darker than I anticipated it being.
Yeah, for sure. People find out that Ghoulies is my favorite movie, and they tend to expect me to love the franchise, and I don't. I think that the second movie is pretty solid, and maybe even a better film. But after the second one, it loses me. The charm of the Ghoulies, it becomes too too silly, too ridiculous for me to really love. The first one, I think they were trying to be more of a straight horror movie. It's not scary. It terrified me when I was little, as it did many children with the toilet stuff, which was, of course, added later. But, it as a whole, to me, it's Ghoulies 1, Ghoulies 2, and then the other shits.
So, it had been like 30 years since I saw Ghoulies. I think I saw it in the middle of the night after my parents went to bed one night. But one thing I find interesting is with a lot of movie genres in general, but I see it a lot in horror, is that you get within a few years a lot of similar movies. So we got Critters, Gremlins, Ghoulies, and if you want the miniature monsters, you could throw Puppet Master in there within the course of about 3 or 4 years.
You've also got Hobgoblins, Munchies.
I forgot about Munchies.
Yeah, and there's like a cluster of them, because just like with Jaws, you have those people that see, oh shit, this one did well, so let's jump on that bandwagon and make some nasty little monsters.
I did find it interesting that they played off kind of the hysteria of the late 70s and early 80s, well, actually through the 80s, of the whole Satanist cult thing.
Yes.
That was a big thing in news and everything known to man. Satanists were everywhere, and that was the main plot of Ghoulies, was a Satanist cult.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the things that I came across in my research, if you guys love Ghoulies as much as Faye does, there's actually a podcast out there called Ghoulies-unflushed, where they just do a deep dive into the lore and to like production, and just it's kind of incredible how much information they've been able to pull out of these 4 films. Faye, I liked the 4th film. It is by no means a Ghoulies movie. It is like, I'd compare it to like Hellraiser's direct-to-video era, where you're like, it's all police procedurals and then Pinhead just happens to show up. Like that's what it is for Ghoulies. Like it's a sequel to it, because as we'll kind of talk about, the main character comes back, and you kind of see like his return to life, but ghoulies are like trying to get home. It's weird.
So it's not like you have Halloween 1 and 2 dealing with Michael Myers and Laurie Strode, and then Night of the Witches.
No, this one is like, it feels like a direct sequel to the original. And it's kind of weird to how they set it up. Like, this is the only film in the entire franchise that also uses like dwarfs in costumes versus like actually like animatronics as well.
The first one had the 2 dwarfs in costume.
Yes, but they actually were like not ghoulies.
Oh, okay. I got what you're saying now.
But like I was saying, is the the Ghoulies for the first one of the things that I learned in prepping for this episode was that what you're seeing with a lot of this satanic stuff and a lot of like the ritualistic stuff that Jonathan goes through is actually like they consulted and like did homework. So if you've ever been interested in what like Satanism 101 is, this is kind of your entry point into it, because they've conducted like history books, like spell books. Like they made sure that like they got it right, like it wasn't just like really hokey. And also, Mark, to your point, this comes out in the middle of the satanic panic. But yeah, it's pretty accurate when it comes to that kind of stuff.
I want to backtrack because you talked about Ghoulies-Unflushed for a moment. I was actually on that podcast. Graham and Paul are Psychocinema members and found out that even though they're over the pond, they found out that I was a big Ghoulies fan. We found each other on, I think, Instagram. And
Nice.
they are like true fans, and got a hold of the elusive, and I even questioned that it even existed. There is a kind of a director's cut of Ghoulies that was only released on TV, and we were able to watch it and had a discussion about that version, which was pretty cool. They're really nice guys.
Yeah, that's what they were talking about in the episode I was listening to today. Is that it's like what, like 10 or 15 minutes, like added then to it.
Yeah. And quite honestly, most of what was added isn't necessarily furthering the story along. But if you know the first movie as well as I do and as well as they do, it was really cool to see some of those scenes expanded upon. There was something that was added to like how a weapon was found, or the token that she wears that kind of protects her, where that came from. I mean, that's there. So there was some cool stuff like that was in that random cut of the movie that was just on like NBC or something.
They did something similar with the Goonies too. They actually did do the octopus scene they talk about in the Goonies.
Yeah.
It was on like a straight to TV release. It was a director's cut they released on TV for like one night.
So
I've never seen it since.
Do you guys know why? And this is just like a quick detour real quick. Do you guys know why cuts like that exist? Because there's also one with extra footage of Halloween, and I want to say there's another movie. It might be Jaws. Do you guys know why they used to do that?
No.
So they actually used to do that because TV, every time you would translate a TV or from like a film to TV, it had to be a certain length of time. And if your movie wasn't actually to that time, you had to actually shoot additional footage. That's why there's like a whole like subplot that's added into Halloween that did not actually make the theatrical cut. And I believe if you can find it online, it's like 10 extra minutes of scenes, but it's basically like Dr. Loomis talking about Michael's progress and lack thereof, basically.
That's wild.
Huh. Yeah, I didn't know that. I'd never heard that.
Well, I'm curious if Faye actually knows the original title for what Ghoulies was going to be.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I probably do, and I don't know. Tell me.
So the original title, when it was conceived in 1982, was actually going to be Beasties.
Beasties, yes.
Beasties later ended up becoming a 1991 direct-to-video movie that I'm guessing is probably not all that great because it holds a 3.1 on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb. But
that doesn't mean it's not great.
That's true.
Those specific people didn't.
That's true. Yeah, Ghoulies has a pretty low score, and I really enjoyed it. But one of the things too to also kind of talk about was that we talked about this in our chat, but Ghoulies was actually conceived right around the same time as Gremlins, and actually went into production at the same time. Like, they were competing with one another. Gremlins ultimately ended up actually letting out in the end.
Yeah, you could see it in the production value of the two movies. One had a big budget behind it and the other didn't. That's really the only way to explain why you've got the Gremlins, which are known by everybody on the face of the earth, and you've got what appears to be methed out Jim Henson puppets in Ghoulies. So I don't know any other way to put that forward.
I love the design of the Ghoulies. I love when people do ask me, like, why do you love the movie so much? I wonder if it is that I love the movie so much, or that I love John Carl Buechler so much, because any movie that he did the creature design for, I love. Troll, not Troll 2, Troll, Terror Vision. He did some incredible creature designs, and I love what he did for Ghoulies. Now, you have Gremlins that has a cuteness factor, and I think that sells and appeals to a broader audience, including kids, which is going to add to that, that financial windfall that they had. You have Ghoulies, it's not kid friendly. As a matter of fact, they were excited to have scared children with the toilet thing. So I think that may have something to do with where those movies fell as far as popularity. I'll go Ghoulies every time. I think that they look a hell of a lot better. That cat ghoulie, my dog looks like the toilet ghoulie. He totally does. Oh, she's going crazy right now. She's offended.
One of the things that I think, from a creature design too, that Ghoulies has over Gremlins is the individuality. And you really see this, like, Gremlins really explored this in the second one, but there's almost kind of like a carbon copy when you watch Gremlins, the 1984 version, and the only one that really has personality is Stripe. And then you get into Ghoulies, and every character, every ghoulie has their own personality. They have their own mischievous ways, but they're all connected to Jonathan Graves, and I think that's what helps this one stand out. And it's a darker tone, like I've previously stated, than Gremlins. But Faye, to your point, like, Gremlins was really used to go after the kids. It was really to go after the even despite some of its darker scenes and tones that it has woven throughout the film, but Ghoulies is just a straight up dark, kind of like I really wouldn't call this campy. Like, I might be in the odd on this one, but I feel like there's enough darker themes in this film to not make it feel campy, because even the Ghoulies themselves, once they start to wreak havoc, they still feel in tone with that darkness, that they do feel like hellspawns. They don't just feel like creatures that randomly showed up during this ceremony.
I agree with that. I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, the movie starts out with a seemingly infant sacrifice that's circumvented. And then, the mother is clearly sacrificed. She's killed. So you can't start off a movie, you can't start off a movie that way and expect it not to be. I mean, that's kind of a scary first few moments. You don't know really where it's going to go from there. And then Jack Nance shows up and saves the baby. But, yeah, it's dark. It's dark. It may not be dark from our viewpoint now, but I think we're all a little jaded at this point with what we've seen and what's come out. I mean, Martyrs exists at this point, so you can't really look at Ghoulies and say that shit's dark. We've all seen Martyrs and Sallow at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was actually getting ready to say. Is like, at this point we've seen so much horror that, yeah, I have nights where it's like I want to watch horror and nothing is right, because it's like I've seen just about every type of horror out there.
Yeah.
And it just And I think that's a problem a lot of people that watch horror all the time have, is you just get to where it's, okay, yeah, it's a rehash of this, it's a rehash of that. And at the time Ghoulies came out, it worked well with the traditional effects. You had, shortly thereafter, Poltergeist came out and used computer effects in a horror movie with some of the ghosts that they had. You didn't have that with movies like Gremlins and Critters and Ghoulies. And Ghoulies used the puppets well, where Gremlins was using more animatronics with puppets mixed in. And it's almost a lost art having the traditional effects and puppets and everything, because everything now comes out as so loaded with computer graphics and computer effects. It's almost become a lost art form now.
Yeah.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Well, speaking of lost art forms, you guys want to jump into some trivia?
Yeah.
All right. Do you guys know what kind of filming technique this film was originally intended to be?
Oh, this was supposed to be 3D.
Yes. They actually began production in 3D. The audiences would put their glasses on every time the characters put their sunglasses on, which is such a unique... brings such a uniqueness to this, because like I feel like with other 3D films it's like, all right, once the movie starts, like the theater is like, now you go and you just wear them the entire film.
I don't know if you're aware of this. Hammer, was it Hammer, I think was his name, did something similar with the original 13 Ghosts.
That's correct.
Every time you had, basically, I think it was 2 sets of glasses. If you wanted to see the ghost, you put on one set. If you didn't, you put on the other. So you could almost build your own film using the same idea that you were just talking about that they planned with Ghoulies.
Man, why don't we do this with movies anymore? Like, make them interaction.
But the thing with the glasses with Ghoulies is if you know that little piece of information, it makes sense when you watch the film, because otherwise you're like, this is a really weird thing that these people are constantly taking on or putting off, these sunglasses, but they were a signal to the crowd that you are about to see, 3D scenes. Otherwise, you don't know that, and you're like, this group of friends is real wild. Like, they love their Ray-Bans. No, there was a reason, and then they scrapped it.
I just figured they were trying to make a way to hide Dude Man's eyes.
Probably.
His eyes.
Did you notice that his contacts kept moving around, so his eyes were constantly pointing in different directions?
That
Yes.
is one of my favorite things about when that starts happening. It is hysterical to me that it's like, whoa, Jonathan's on some shit, because there is one eye looking at the kitchen and one eye looking at the person he's talking to. Those are so fun. Those scenes are so fun.
So do you guys know what ghoulie actually means in Persian?
Beastie.
It actually means small monster.
Isn't Beastie's a small monster?
I think she gets it on a technicality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll give it to you. No, it's not like a super lot of trivia for this one. It is interesting. It is interesting to me, though, that this film, in some ways, it feels like it should be. Maybe this is just me kind of watching this from a 2021 vantage point, and knowing what I know about like the VHS direct-to-video boom of the 80s. This film feels in some ways a lot like you could find it, but I was very surprised to know that this film was actually released theatrically. It had a small theatrical release, but it was still released theatrically nonetheless, and it kind of has a lot of those direct-to-video I would say knockoffs, the slashers boom was doing around this time, but it's kind of where I kind of thought, tonally speaking, of this movie.
Yes, I agree. It does. It feels very much on par with something like 976 Evil, where it looks like some of those amazing Vestron films. And I love those straight-to-video movies of that era. Those are fantastic, fantastic movies. So when I started Psycho Cinema, this was at top of my list to get. And I wasn't 100% sure that I could, because theatrical rights have to exist in order for us to show these movies at the Alamo. So I was super excited to find out that it had that limited release, because that meant that it was showable in theory for Alamo. But it sure doesn't feel like it's a theatrical kind of movie.
I would love to see Ghoulies on the big screen. Sounds like a fun time.
It is. It's so good. I've shown it twice. And I'll probably show it again. I say that at Psycho Cinema all the time, that stick around. I will show this movie every September for my birthday if I can. I have that power.
And there's just movies like that depending on who you're watching them with, it's just fun to rewatch them with those people again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's go ahead and dig into some of the meat of this. If you guys have not seen Ghoulies, this is your official spoiler warning that we've kind of talked a little bit about it. As of this recording, it is now streaming on HBO and HBO Max, or wherever you guys rent your movies from. But yeah, so where do you guys want to start with Ghoulies? Because I feel like we've talked a lot about what makes this movie so great. Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty details of why.
So can we talk about the fact that Mariska Hargitay premiered in this movie?
Yes, this is her film debut.
Yep. And it's interesting. It's one of the things we talked about in the chat leading up to this, was that so many big-name and recognizable actors seem to have got an early start in horror. Mm-hmm. And Mariska Hargitay happens to be one of them, and now she's on Law and Order every week.
Yeah, it's interesting to see her in it, because I mean, she's so young, and it's very much an ensemble cast. I mean, other than Jonathan and Rebecca, everyone else is kind of a bit player, and she's one of those people. But she's a standout to me in the part that she plays. I don't know if it's because she's so beautiful or if she just has that presence. But I think she's very noticeable. I mean, she's the screamer in the moments where they think something naughty is going on, but she dropped that bracelet. Ghoulies came for her.
Toad Boy,
which is he's got to be like 30 years old. Why does he talk like that? All my years of knowing Ghoulies stuff, I have no idea why that was. Why did you choose that? That's so odd. Anyway. Also, that woman would never be with Toad Boy. She'd be with Dick.
With Dick.
She'd be with Dick.
I mean, you're not wrong. I think one of the only thing that I could think of why we see Toad Boy act the way that he does is kind of it's kind of like I'm trying to think of the technical term for it, but it's like a manner of like reverting to simpler times because like whether you're nervous or whatever, like there's almost a regression that takes place, to where you kind of feel like you can't show who your true colors, in other words.
He seemed more like comic relief to me.
It might be a bit of both. I mean, you remember him. He stands out because of the silliness of his cadence. So it could be a bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to a degree, it is a bit of both, because he kind of, like I said, like there's kind of camp to the Ghoulies, but they never feel like so out of line with the rest of the tone of the movie. And Toad Boy, for as campy and weird as he can be, he still kind of balances with the Ghoulies. And, you know, like Mark said before we started recording, like, I'm the analytical one. So, like, I'm looking at as someone that is clearly has some like deeper like rooted issues that he have made him turn out this way, and he's just kind of reverting to what he knows to be safe.
You could be right, because the dialogue that he has, it almost sounds like he speaks that way when he is facing rejection, when she is kind of on the fence about moving forward with him. He kind of sounds like a child, so it could very well be that that's just his defense mechanism, is to speak like Toad Boy.
Like I said, I just took him as comic relief, because that tend to be a lot of the formula of these movies. You had your douchebag, you had your pretty girl, you had your comic relief, and the hero, and it's still, that formula plays through today in a lot of stuff.
Sure.
But that's just how I took his character. But then again, Josh is the analytical one. So.
When you do a podcast about mental health and looking at mental health through the lens of horror, I have a tendency to, yes, be the analytical one. But I would challenge your comic relief with the stoners in this movie. Two guys that just remind me of the guy in I can't remember the character's name, but he's the guy in Friday the 13th part 3, where he's basically, his entire thing is like he can't get laid, so he just laughs at a movie high the entire time.
Who hasn't been there?
I mean, I could go with drunk watching a movie laughing the whole time, but that's the extent of it. Yeah, he was just a weird character.
He is, yeah, he is. But the ones that we see, they're all kind of weird. I mean, Dick is like a walking sexual assault. Like he's
it's like, how have you not been charged at this point?
Right? He's so borderline molesty in the way he behaves. So he's kind of creepy and weird. And we're not going to talk about Jonathan and Rebecca, but then there's the two stoner buddies. There's the random girl. I can't even think of who she is, but I mean, everyone has kind of some strange qualities. This friend group is questionable.
Oh yeah, and like the friend group is interesting, the way it weaves in and out of the narrative. There's one thing in particular I do eventually would like to get to Rebecca and Jonathan, because they have a really interesting dynamic, I think, woven throughout the course of this. But since you're a super fan, can you explain how the whole like I can shoot laser beams through my eyeball thing works at the end of this movie between the caretaker and like Malcolm? Because that was just something that I was like, oh, they're shooting laser beams out of their eyes. Where did this come from?
So Wolfgang, who is played expertly by Jack Nance, who shows up quite a bit in David Lynch films and who I adore, and had a really crazy death. If you don't know anything about how Jack Nance died, it's fascinating. But he, okay, so we're going to have to suspend some disbelief in ghoulies, but I would hope that we're kind of doing that anyway. I feel like he is part of that initial cult. So you have Malcolm, who was like the leader, and I think Wolfgang was one of the higher ups, but he was not on board with sacrificing any babies. And, you know, he takes Jonathan and saves him. I feel that he dabbled highly in whatever black magic stuff Malcolm and the cult was involved in. So I think that he's able to gather those forces and use them in that final battle. Black magic-y kind of stuff. I mean, the same thing that would have allowed Malcolm to rise, Jonathan to take on the powers that he takes on. It's the same thing that Wolfgang, who seems like he's just a regular caretaker, but at some point, because of what we see in the beginning, he must have been a part of a pretty significant part of that cult. So I think that he just has the ability to do that. You can't shoot lasers from your eyes?
I mean, if I take my glasses off, I might be able to.
Same.
So are we using the same explanation for the thunderstorm in the basement and not just plumbing leaking?
The house is not in great shape, so it could go either way.
I just took that on a ritual gone wrong, so I mean, it can literally go either way. Bad plumbing, you know, any way it chooses to.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
But yeah, so I kind of want to get into some of the minutia of Jonathan and kind of the way that he doesn't really know his parents, and he gets into the occultic lifestyle through basically coming into this house. And if we can, I'd like to get a little bit personal over the next few minutes, just kind of talking about one scene in particular, which I guess for context, Rebecca is Jonathan's girlfriend, and she basically is like, he convinces her that he's just gonna drop out of school to take home, kind of remodel the home, basically, because it's kind of in shambles when they first get there. And she kind of walks in on him doing a ritual and says, "I don't even know who you are anymore." And I'm kind of one of all right, let me rephrase this. And on this, I might actually be the only one on this podcast, but I am a Christian, and I do have my own set of beliefs, and I've gone through the ringer, and I've experienced like the worst side of what religion has to offer. But the way that he just kind of dives in and obsesses over this, it's interesting to me watching this through that lens, is because he basically turns him into a completely different person, and I feel like the extreme side of religion has that effect on some people.
So I think with his character, it was being back in the house. I think that's why he was willed the house to begin with. is because he knew that this was going to happen to the kid coming back into this environment. He was just going to be drawn into it. But yeah, from what you're saying, I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church, and my whole family is, and I've known nihilists, Satanists, pagans, just about everything known to man. And when you get into any extreme, you start ending up with weird stuff like that.
So it's interesting that you guys are bringing that up, because I was not brought up in the church. I'm an atheist, and I come from a long line of atheists. Not really, just my mom, but but that sounded much cooler. It's never really. I've never made the correlation, and I guess this is crazy, really, of the religion aspect of things. To me, I feel like he went on the journey that he did to find his father. I mean, he clearly didn't have any kind of relationship with his father, and his mother is dead at birth. They say briefly that, kind of Wolfgang brought him up. So I feel like, though, he's definitely willed this house so that his father can rise and do all of the shit that he wants to do. I think that Jonathan is initially open to these forces kind of taking him over because he wants to find out where he comes from and wants to find out what happened with his father.
I think to a degree that you are right. I think that somewhere along his character journey throughout this movie, that definitely becomes a driving force for what it is, why he gets into doing this. I think almost kind of like there's that scene where they're all kind of sitting around and they're all trying to figure out, what to do. And then, people are like, oh, we should do charades. We should do like board games or whatever. And he's like, let's do a ritual.
Let's summon some demons.
And I think for him, it's kind of
strip poker. I just want to bring Dick up one more time and his creepiness. Strip poker is what he said. No, Jonathan, all about that ritual.
And
who randomly just says that? Have you ever been to a party where y'all are like, I don't know, the beer's out, the keg is tapped. Let's summon the devil.
But we've all known Dick. All of us know.
Yes.
Every one of us knows someone like Dick. Whether we're friends with them or want to slap him silly, we know Dick.
No Dick.
It's very true. But I think to your point, Faye, I think that there's a lot of curiosity that because depending on what country of origin you believe, he's either 18 or 21 in this movie. But I think to that point, we're kind of at this point where when you're that young, you're really wanting to just try all that life has to offer you. It's why you hear so many, 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, maybe even up to like 25-year-olds talking about experimenting with drugs and, getting drunk and, sleeping around with multiple different people. And I think for him, that's kind of how it originally starts. And then once he is able to succeed, he is just all in and he's just all extremity. And I guess the reason why I'm bringing that up is because it's so alienating to people. And when I tell people that, like, I'm a Christian, I always feel like very... like I don't know if I should tell people this because of that feeling of alienation, because the church has been given such a bad name because of people being so extreme instead of just really wanting to sit down and do life and kind of grow with people and get to know people.
And that comes from the first image that comes to mind is the crazies. And it's like that with just about anything.
Anything that has extremists, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be the first thing you think of is the nut jobs.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and I guess to my point is that that extremity is takes its toll on Jonathan to a point where in this movie he ultimately ends up losing the love of his life in it because of it. And you know, if you want to call it canon or not, part 4, when it picks back up, like, he walks away from all of like the witchcraft and paganism and Satanism stuff, because he is, you know, because of how much it cost him, and now he's just at a point where he just wants to live a normal life. And you know, what is your extremity in life? And it doesn't even have to be religion. You know, it could be addiction, it can be alcoholism, it can be depression. You know, what are you willing to sacrifice before you realize that you need help?
That's a really interesting point, and way deeper than I would have anticipated a Ghoulies conversation could go. But but it really is a very good point, because because he does initially want to protect Rebecca because she's the most important thing to him. But as he gets deeper down that hole of wanting power and control, he's pretty much willing to let her fall as she falls. I think he still has regret about it, but when she tears that necklace off and she's going to, you know, go about her business, he doesn't react in the same way that I think he would at the beginning of his journey, because, you know, priorities have switched. They've changed for him a bit.
I haven't seen the 4th one, so I don't know.
No, you're good. But Two-Face point, I also want to bring up the scene where, you know, he makes her the amulet that's actually supposed to be like a protection spell, and that way, you know, all the ghoulies and all those that are doing the bidding of the devil can't actually hurt her because she has that protection spell. And it comes at a time before he gets like really deep into the darker side of the, you know, the religion aspect of it. And I think that there's a part of him that knew that he was going to possibly sacrifice her, but also at the same time that he was going to really push the limits on their relationship.
Can we talk about how he made that amulet? He stuck like a coin or something in the fire and scraped at it with his stick, and then gives her this nice, beautifully engraved amulet.
Bro, don't question it.
Lasers for eyes. You just have to let these things be.
Freaking laser beams.
I mean, could you imagine like saving your, like, the money you spent on your wife's engagement and wedding ring and just doing something like that? Boom. Every time she wanted jewelry, there you go.
I'll scrape a piece of metal with a stick.
I made this for you.
But it's, so these kind of movies are for fun, are fantastic fun for people. Imagine if this movie, the way it's written now, came out today with all these couch and keyboard critics that, oh, this plot hole, that plot hole. Like, we can joke about it because it was the 80s and we grew up with this. Well, except for Josh, we grew up with these movies, so we understand that this is just how it was, and we go with it and laugh.
That's true. I number one, I questioned that this movie would be made. If it was made, it would be completely different. It would be a completely different film. It would be CGI'd. Mm-hmm. It would either be heavy comedy or, you know, complete gore. There wouldn't be the middle ground. It would be a very different film. And if it came out as it is now, you know, yeah, there's a nostalgia to it that I appreciate. That's one of the things that I love so much about it. It harkens back to a simpler time in horror, but it would be different now. It wouldn't be as good. It wouldn't be as pure. It's weirdly wholesome.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't have that, like, that wholesome edge to it. And to your point, Mark, this film currently holds an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. And also, even the critic, even the fans, like, are not really big into this. I think it holds like a 25% or something like that from fans. But this movie, it's weird because I don't think that it would be made in today. Like you guys were saying, like I can't remember the last time that we've actually gotten like a big screen, like straight up horror comedy or something that is meshes those two together. Like obviously, like if you guys are subscribed to Shudder, you guys know about movies like Scare Me and Slacks. And if you guys haven't checked out either one of those, please do, especially Scare Me. Great movie. But I feel like there's such a niche audience for films like this. And this came out like right around this, like you were saying, like Mark, like this came out during this like big boom in the 80s where it's like, all right, we need to go ahead and we need to start placing things like Gremlins, Critters, Ghoulies, and you had that boom run for 5 or 6 years simultaneously with the slasher boom of the 80s and the VHS direct-to-video boom. 80s were a great time for horror, and I think that you have services like Shudder and Arrow Video that are still making that those available, but never to the degree that we saw in the 80s.
Yeah, Shudder's one of the greatest streaming services ever if you're a horror fan. It has everything you will not find on Amazon or Netflix or Paramount Plus or anything else.
Shudder. No, please go ahead. You go.
It's got black and white Boris Karloff classics. You've got your Asian horror. You've got everything you can possibly think of, even some of Rob Zombie's releases, and it covers everything for horror, and I absolutely love it. It's my favorite streaming service.
Shudder really is wonderful, and it's cheap too. But just as you said, I mean, you can find something for anyone. They have such a diverse selection, and I love that about Shudder. Foreign films, giallos, it's a great time to be alive as a horror fan now that we have Shudder.
And Shudder makes me happy because I'm a big fan of Asian horror. I feel like it has enough originality to it that it can stand on its own. It has some fantastic movies, and they build a lot off the folklore of the country that makes the movie, as opposed to just American horror tends to rehash the same things over and over. The Asian stuff, if you've never watched Asian horror, or anybody listening, find some on Shudder, or even the original Rings. It's a almost different quality of horror.
Oh yeah,
than a lot of the stuff we get now.
Yeah, and you guys will definitely be seeing some Japanese and Asian horror make its way to this show, because I got into I went through this like weird phase where I wouldn't want to actually watch any horror that, like, if I had to read along, and then I watched I can't pronounce it, but the original like Grudge, and was blown away.
Ju-on.
Yeah, Ju-on.
Yeah, dude, Ju-on.
I was just blown away by how good it was, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to get over this right now, and started watching stuff, Parasite and Train to Busan and Ringu, and there's so many good Japanese horror and just really international horror too, that come from, horror is one of those things that's celebrated all over, and all different countries has such a diverse look into the genre and feel for it, and cultural influence from it, that it's always interesting to kind of get into, escape to another country for a few hours and just kind of see how they handle the things like slashers or supernatural, or just even those like slow burn horrors like Hereditary or Midsummer.
I would agree with you. It's as a horror fan, I think that as an American horror fan, we kind of are used to seeing the same kinds of things over and over again, and being able to have something like Shudder, which gives us the opportunity to see a foreign take on the genre, is really cool. Something like Old Boy or Audition, things that are just nasty and disturbing and just a different feel altogether. It's a journey worth taking, even if it ends up not being something that you truly love. There's so much out there to see.
So back to Ghoulies.
Yeah, I mean, just a side note that Shudder, holler at us. If you want to sponsor us, we would love it. We already watch it. I think Mark and I probably put at least 40 hours a week into Shudder. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Sidebar to Shudder once, just for one more moment. Is Psycho Goreman on there yet?
Yes.
That is one that people should go and see for the horror comedy and the practical effects that we were talking about just a bit ago. Absolutely amazing. BioCop is one of my favorite horror shorts ever, by the same people, and Psycho Goreman was just outstanding, I thought.
They're supposedly already working on a second one.
That's exciting. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I watched it with Kate, and she just laughed at it the entire time. It's like, this movie's completely ridiculous, but it's awesome.
It was just a good time.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you guys. It was actually the first film I got to watch this year, and I got to actually see it before Psycho Cinema did their screening, and I was like, I'm so happy for you guys getting to experience this, because it is such a delightful film. It's a weird film, but it's like it checks off all those boxes, because it's like one part like 80s, but like one part like 90s, but yet it still somehow feels so incredibly modern, with like an engaging story and great performances and endearing characters. It's an excellent blend of horror, comedy, and heartfelt.
It really was. Again, I'm going to say this just like I talked about Ghoulies. It's weirdly wholesome. There was some gore. There was some real crazy gore, some questionable language, some hunky boys, and weirdly wholesome. Like it was really good. Good combo of things.
Yeah.
Appealing things.
Talking about horror comedy, you'll like this segue. I kind of think Ghoulies fell into the category of the original Evil Dead, in the fact that it was planned to be a serious horror, but the way it was done and presented ended up making it a comedy horror.
I would fight back on you with that. I think that once you get into like the second film, like to me, I didn't laugh that much in this first film, but I found myself laughing at like the second one, and then being bored, ungodly bored by the third one. And then the fourth one, like, also kind of had like that similar tone. Like it's not quite funny to me, but it's got that like level of camp to where it's not like totally serious, but it walks that line very, very stealthily.
I don't know. I found some of the things that they did, like was Toad Boy, Frog Boy.
Toad Boy.
Yeah, my brain doesn't work well sometimes. Him, the tongue scene, and various other scenes like that, to me felt like they were trying to be serious with the movie, like the original Evil Dead was, but it ended up just being funny. And that's just how it came across to me, but I'm weird, so...
No, that's great. All right, so one last thing that I am going to throw out here as far as trivia goes. Mark, you talked about how this was how do you say your name?
Mariska Hargitay.
That lady. This was her film debut, and her scream in the scene where she actually has to scream, she gets dragged into the fountain. It's actually a stock sound effect. Apparently, she actually has a naturally deep, very husky voice and couldn't actually produce a scream loud enough or high pitched enough for the liking of the director. So she is no scream queen.
And thinking about stuff I've seen her in, I could actually see that.
Yeah. I can't. It still blows my mind that, like, she got her debut in this movie, of all things. Like, to me, she's always just been Law and Order, SVU, but it just breaks my brain that this is where she started.
Well, Leonardo DiCaprio showed up in Critters 2. I think that was his debut.
I think it was Critters 3.
And you've got Renee Zellweger. She's in a Texas Chainsaw.
Oh,
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks
is in a horror movie from the 70s.
Jennifer Aniston was in Leprechaun.
Yeah.
I think that's a common, because horror movies can be kind of low budget indie. So I think it's a pretty common.
Yeah, I think the horror genre tends to thrive off newcomers to the acting industry, because they tend not to have a super huge budget to hire the Brad Pitts. So they get these newcomers, and then they go along, and you end up with the guys we got now. We know them from various movies that they've been in, and they got their start in some straight-to-video horror movie.
Right. And Mariska Hargitay is in Lake Placid as well.
Ah, yeah, okay.
So is Betty White.
And so is Betty White. That's a great movie. That's a fun one, too. Betty White, the legend.
Yes. She's older than sliced bread.
You can find nudie pictures of her online. Yes. And they're good.
Yes. So, on that note, that is going to do it for the first episode of Abyss Gazing. Where can people find out more information about Psycho Cinema?
We do have a Facebook page called Psycho Cinema, and I list upcoming movies. People have requests, I take them there. We have a pretty hoppin' community, so there's a lot of dialogue that goes on a daily basis on that Facebook page. So that would be the best place to start.
Yeah, it's not unusual to see me posting comments or memes on there.
Absolutely.
Regularly.
Yeah.
Also, if you guys are into Instagram, they are Psycho Cinema 540, correct?
Yes, it's the area code of the area. So yeah, Psycho Cinema 540 on Instagram.
Instagram's like really just become a hub for horror for me now. So I love like finding like artists, and I love the content that Psycho Cinema posts on there as well. So
thank you. I have a little bit less promotion for our upcoming movies on the Instagram. More I really love them. So I have a fun time with that one.
Well, you guys can find our parent company at Victims and Villains, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Mark, where can people find you online?
I just do my miniature painting through Instagram, Titanium Juggernaut Painting.
And you guys can find me at on Instagram and Letterboxd. I am at Captain Nostalgia. And if you or someone you know is listening to this right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to consider the resource library in the show notes wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. We love talking about horror. It's not the sole reason we make this content. We want to remind you that you have value and that you have worth and purpose, and that there's always a bigger plan past depression. So please stay with us and consider the resources. And Mark, what are we talking about next time?
I believe we're talking about the original Christopher Lee Wicker Man.
Yeah, this movie, I can't wait for this discussion. It's what a weird experience this was.
But it was a fantastic choice.
It was. And remember, if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. We're leaving you guys with Peachy. If you guys like what you hear, make sure that you guys click the link in the descriptions below to check out more of their music and follow them on social media. This song is called I'm Not Superstitious, but I Am a Little Stitious. We hope you guys enjoy and have a great night.